January 15, 1944, Norfolk House, London. General George S. Patton, Jr. is leaning over a large table covered with maps of northern France. His red pencil marks potential breakthrough routes from the beaches inland, arrows, speed calculations, distance markers. He's already planning his drive to Berlin. Then an aide enters without knocking. Patton doesn't look up. The aide clears his throat. "General, they've announced the command structure for Overlord." Patton's pencil pauses. "Montgomery is taking ground command." The pencil stops mid-stroke. Patton looks up slowly. "Say that again." The aide swallows. "Field Marshal Montgomery. He'll command all ground forces for the 1st U.S. Army, 2nd British Army, everything." Patton stares at him. "Montgomery? Bernard Montgomery is commanding American troops?" The aide nods. "Sir, General Eisenhower felt that Montgomery's experience coordinating the Sicily operations." Patton cuts him off. "I commanded in Sicily. Montgomery was so slow the Germans escaped to Italy with half their army." The aide shifts his weight. "It's already decided, sir." Patton looks back at his maps. At the arrows he's drawn. At the routes he's planned. Then he sets the pencil down. "Get out." The aide leaves. Patton stands alone in the room, staring at the maps of a campaign he won't be leading. If you're passionate about untold Waterloo stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to WW2 Elite, hit the like button, and drop a comment below telling us which general you think was right for D-Day. Your support helps us bring these incredible moments of history to life. Within hours, the news spreads across Allied headquarters. At chefs, staff officers whisper in hallways. American generals exchange glances. British officers nod in approval. But the announcement reaches another office that evening. Winston Churchill is sitting in his study at number 10 Downing Street, lighting a cigar, when his military secretary walks in, carrying a folder. "Prime Minister, the Overlord command structure has been finalized." Opens it. Reads the organizational chart. At the top, Eisenhower, Supreme Commander. Below him, Montgomery, Ground Forces Commander. Below Montgomery, Bradley, commanding 1st U.S. Army. And off to the side, in smaller text, Patton, 3rd Army, Phase 2 operations only. Churchill stares at the chart for a long moment. Then he picks up the telephone. "Get me General Eisenhower." The phone rings at Chafe headquarters. Eisenhower picks it up. "Mr. Prime Minister?" Churchill's voice is calm. "Ike, I've seen your command structure. Montgomery over Bradley. Montgomery over everyone." Eisenhower leans back in his chair. "Prime Minister, Monty has the experience coordinating multinational forces. He handled 8th Army brilliantly at El Alamein." Churchill exhales cigar smoke. "He handled 8th Army slowly. Alamein to Tunis took 6 months. Patton crossed Sicily in 38 days. Eisenhower's voice firms up. "Patton also slapped 2 soldiers and nearly destroyed his career. He's brilliant on the battlefield, but he's a liability off it." Churchill: "So you're giving the Americans' greatest attack dog to Britain's most cautious general?" Eisenhower says, "I'm giving the invasion to someone who won't lose it in the first week. We get one shot at this, Prime Minister. One. If we fail at Normandy, there's no second invasion. Montgomery doesn't take risks." "That's exactly what I need." There's a long silence on the line. Then Churchill says, "Ike, I'm not arguing the decision. I'm preparing you for the consequences." Eisenhower asks, "Which are?" Churchill says, "Patton will hate Montgomery. Montgomery will ignore Patton. And Bradley will be caught in the middle, trying to win a war while his superiors fight each other." Eisenhower replies, "Then I'll manage them." Churchill's voice is quiet. "You'll try." He hangs up. Churchill sets the phone down, stares at his cigar. His secretary steps forward. "Sir, shall I draft a memo to the War Cabinet regarding the command announcement?" Churchill shakes his head. "No." He looks at the organizational chart again. "Let's see how long it takes before Eisenhower realizes he's made Montgomery the most powerful British general since Wellington, and the Americans aren't going to like it." The secretary nods, and Churchill sits alone in his study, smoke curling upward in the lamplight. Back in London, Patton sits in his quarters that night. He opens his diary. February 3rd, 1944. He writes, "I am to sit in England like a spare tire, while Montgomery lectures Bradley on how Americans should fight." He closes the diary, stares at the wall. For 18 months, Patton has been in combat. North Africa in 1942, Sicily in 1943. He's led American forces through victories and controversies. And now, The biggest operation of the war, the one that will decide everything. And he's been put on the bench. Montgomery gets overall command. Bradley, Patton's Jr., gets immediate battlefield command. And he gets to command Third Army. Whenever Third Army is activated, if it's activated. The orders say Phase 2, post-breakout operations. That means Patton doesn't fight until someone else wins the beach. He's expected to sit in England and wait. Wait while others plan, wait while others land, wait while others fight. And if they fail, then Patton never fights at all. February turns to March. Patton submits a formal request to Eisenhower. He wants a frontline with any role. He'll take a corps command under Bradley. He'll take a division if necessary. Just don't leave him in England. Eisenhower denies the request. Patton submits a second request 2 weeks later. Denied again. The third request in early March. Denied. Meanwhile, Montgomery holds planning conferences at his headquarters. Bradley attends. British generals attend. Canadian commanders. Royal Navy officers. Patton is not invited. He reads about the meetings in briefings that arrive days late. He sees the plans taking shape without his input. Maps are, timelines are set, objectives are assigned, and Patton is somewhere else, training an army that doesn't exist yet for a battle that may never happen. At SHAEF, the organizational structure becomes reality. Montgomery doesn't just accept ground command, he expands it. He requests operational control of Allied tactical air forces. He requests direct authority over logistics and supply distribution. He begins referring to himself as Commander-in-Chief, Ground Forces in official communications, a title Eisenhower never formally gave him. And Bradley, commanding 1st U.S. Army, starts receiving orders directly from Montgomery. Not suggestions, orders. Often without Eisenhower being informed first. March 21st, 1944. Bradley receives Montgomery's master plan for the breakout from Normandy. He reads it in his office. The plan gives British Second Army the main thrust toward Caen and the roads to Paris. 1st U.S. Army is assigned to hold the western shoulder of the beachhead and draw German armored reserves. In other words, Bradley's Americans will absorb casualties while Montgomery's British take the glory. Bradley picks up the phone, calls Eisenhower. "Ike, Montgomery's got me playing defense while he scores the touchdown." Eisenhower's voice is tired. "Brad, the plan works. Monty's methodology is sound. Just execute it." Bradley hesitates. "And what do I tell Patton when he finds out?" Silence on the line. Then Eisenhower says, "Don't tell him yet." He hangs up. But Montgomery wasn't done expanding his power, and what he did next made even Churchill nervous. By late March, Montgomery is holding court at his headquarters like a monarch. He issues directives. He sets policy. He even begins making public statements about Allied strategy without clearing them with Eisenhower first. British newspapers call him the architect of victory. American newspapers start asking why a British general is commanding American troops. The tension spreads. At cocktail parties in London, American officers complain privately. British officers defend Montgomery's brilliance. And in Washington, members of Congress start receiving letters from constituents asking why General Patton, a household name after Sicily, is sitting idle while the invasion is led by someone most Americans have never heard of. April 10th, 1944, Patton attends a planning session, finally. He's been requesting access for weeks. Now, Montgomery has agreed to brief senior commanders on the final Overlord plan. Patton sits in the back of the room. Montgomery stands at the front, pointer in hand, walking through phase lines and consolidation periods and supply timelines. He talks for 2 hours. Detailed. Methodical. Every risk accounted for. Every contingency planned. When he finishes, he asks if there are questions. Patton raises his hand. Montgomery looks at him. "Yes, George?" Patton's voice is calm. "When do we stop planning and start killing?" The room goes silent. Montgomery blinks. "Excuse me," Patton says. "You've been planning this invasion for months. At some point, we have to actually fight it. When does that happen?" Montgomery's voice is cold. "General Patton, this is a methodical operation. We will advance as supplies and coordination permit. We're not cowboys charging across open country." Patton stands up. "So we're going to crawl across France?" Montgomery's face tightens. "We're going to win across France. Slowly is better than recklessly." Patton looks at him. "In my experience, Field Marshal, quickly is better than both." The room stays silent. Montgomery stares at the door. Then he continues the briefing as if nothing happened. That evening, Eisenhower receives 2 separate cables. The first from Montgomery, Request General Patton be removed from European theatre. His attitude is damaging to Allied cooperation and operational planning. The second from Patton. Request transfer to Pacific Theatre. Suggest Montgomery be sent back to the desert where Slow worked. Eisenhower reads both cables. Sets them down. Opens his diary. He writes, I am spending more time refereeing my generals than fighting Germans. Monty and Patton hate each other. Bradley is caught in the middle, and I'm trying to plan the largest invasion in history while my commanders act like children. He closes the diary, rubs his eyes, and makes a decision. He will keep both generals. Montgomery will command the landing, Patton will wait, and Eisenhower will manage the fallout somehow. By April, Patton had been sidelined for 3 months. Then he made a decision that would almost end his career. Again, April 25th, 1944. Patton is invited to speak at a British welcome club in Knutsford, a small English town. The event is meant to promote Allied unity. Patton is trying to mend fences. He stands at a podium in front of British civilians and a few journalists. He gives a short speech about friendship between nations. Then he says, the British and Americans are destined to rule the world. The audience applauds politely. But a reporter in the back writes it down different. The next morning newspapers print, Patton says Americans and British, and possibly the Russians, are destined to rule the world. Patton forgot to mention the Soviets, or the reporter forgot to include them. Either way, the press explodes. American newspapers call it an insult to Stalin. British papers say Patton is undermining the alliance. Soviet officials express concern, and in Washington, Congress erupts. 18 congressmen send telegrams to the War Department demanding Patton be relieved immediately. April 27, 1944. Eisenhower is handed a stack of press clippings. He reads them twice. Then he picks up the phone and calls General George Marshall, Chief of Staff of the Army in Washington. Marshall's voice is sharp. Ike, I've protected Patton through the slapping incidents. I've protected him through the press disasters. I've defended him to Congress, to the President, to the Joint Chiefs. How many times can one general step on his own grenade? Eisenhower says quietly, he's the best attack commander we have. Marshall replies, then use him or lose him. But if you keep him, you'd better unleash him before he explodes. Because I can't protect him anymore. The next time he makes headlines, he's done. Eisenhower hangs up. He sits at his desk for a long time, staring at the press clippings, at the cables from congressmen, at the note from Stalin's ambassador, asking if Patton speaks for American policy, and at a private message from Churchill that simply says, this is what happens when you give a loaded gun to a child. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, someone else was watching this disaster unfold, and he was about to force Eisenhower's hand. At Bradley's headquarters, Bradley is talking to his staff. Montgomery thinks Patton is a barbarian. Maybe he is. But when we break out of Normandy, I want that barbarian running loose in France, not stuck in England writing apology letters. One of his aides asks, do you think Ike will keep him? At the arrows showing the planned breakout routes. He has to, because if we get stuck in Normandy, Patton's the only one fast enough to save us. At Montgomery's headquarters, Montgomery is speaking to British staff officers. If they're going to keep Patton, at least keep him away from journalists and away from them. One officer asks, do you believe he'll be effective, sir? Montgomery says, Patton is a talented tactical commander, but tactics are not strategy. And strategy is what wins wars. He turns back to his maps, confident, methodical, certain. But Eisenhower made a decision. Despite the scandal, despite the political pressure, despite the calls for Patton's head, Eisenhower keeps him. He releases a public statement. General Patton has committed no military offense. He will take command of Third Army when operations require. His records, it's a public vote of confidence. But privately, Eisenhower does something else. May 1st, 1944. He calls Patton to his office. Patton walks in, stands at attention. Eisenhower looks at him. Sit down, George. Patton sits. Eisenhower says, do you want to go home or do you want to fight? Fight. Eisenhower nods. Then shut up. Stay out of trouble. Stop giving speeches. Stop talking to reporters. And wait for Monty to crack open Normandy. Then I'm turning you loose. Patton leans forward. And if Montgomery doesn't crack it open, then I'll have made the wrong choice for ground commander. But that's my problem, not yours. Your problem is staying ready. Can you do that? Patton nods. Yes, sir. Eisenhower says, then get out of here before you make another headline. Salutes, walks out, and for the first time in months he smiles. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The invasion begins. Montgomery's plan unfolds exactly as designed. American and British forces land on 5 beaches. Casualties are heavy but manageable. By nightfall, the Allies' Montgomery's methodical approach works. No catastrophic failures, no operational collapse. The beachhead holds. But then the problems start. June turns to July. The breakout is supposed to happen within days. But Montgomery's forces get bogged down around Caen. British Second Army attacks, gets stopped. Attacks again, gets stopped again. German armored divisions pour in. The fighting turns into a brutal stalemate. First U.S. Army, under Bradley, is holding the western flank as planned. But the main thrust, Montgomery's responsibility, isn't moving. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into a month. By late July, Allied forces have advanced less than 30 miles from the beaches. The press starts asking questions. Eisenhower starts getting pressure from Washington and London, and Patton is still in England, waiting. July 28, 1944. Eisenhower makes a call. Third Army is activated. Patton is unleashed. August 1, 1944. Patton's forces cross into France, and everything changes. Within 10 days, Third Army races 200 miles across Brittany and toward the Seine River. Patton doesn't consolidate. He doesn't wait for supplies. He moves. Fast, relentless, overwhelming. By August 10th, Patton has advanced further in 10 days than Montgomery advanced in 2 months. His columns are stretching supply lines to the breaking point. His tanks are running on fumes, but they're moving, and the Germans are collapsing. Meanwhile, Montgomery's British forces are still grinding through Caen. The contrast is stark, brutal, undeniable. August 12, 1944. Winston Churchill visits Eisenhower's headquarters in Normandy. They stand together in a command tent, looking at a large map on the wall. Blue arrows show Allied positions. Red shows German. Patton's Third Army is a deep blue spear driving east, almost to the German border. Montgomery's 21st Army Group is a thick blue mass still clustered around Caen. Churchill stands with his hands behind his back, cigar in his mouth. Eisenhower stands beside him, arms crossed. Churchill says quiet, "You kept him." Eisenhower nods. "I did." Churchill points at the map. And now he's halfway to Germany while Montgomery is still polishing his boots in Caen. Eisenhower's voice is defensive. Monty absorbed the German armor. He held Rommel and von Kluge in place so Patton could break through. That was the plan. Churchill raises a hand. "I'm not criticizing Montgomery's plan. It worked. Slowly, but it worked." Eisenhower turns to him. "Then what are you saying, Prime Minister?" Churchill takes the cigar from his mouth, looks at the map, at Patton's arrows, at Montgomery's slow grind. And then he says it. "You chose the right general to win the landing, but Patton is the right general to... Montgomery will win it methodically. Patton will win it quickly. And between the two, you've just learned the difference." Eisenhower says nothing. Churchill continues. "Montgomery was perfect for Normandy. You needed someone who wouldn't... Someone who plans for every risk, accounts for every variable, refuses to make mistakes. That's Montgomery. And on June 6th, that's exactly what you needed. One mistake at Normandy, and the invasion fails. We don't get a second chance. The politics collapse. The alliance fractures. Germany wins the war." He pauses. "So yes, Ike, you made the right choice for the landing. But the landing is over. And now you need someone who doesn't plan. Someone who reacts. Someone who moves so fast the enemy can't respond. That's Pat. You kept him in a cage for 6 months because you were afraid of what he'd break. And now you've opened the cage, and he's doing exactly what you were afraid of. He's breaking everything, including the German army." Eisenhower looks at the map, at the 2 generals, 2 styles, 2 philosophies. Churchill says quietly, "You can't command genius, Ike. You can only aim it." He puts the cigar back in his mouth. "Montgomery is a genius at not... Patton is a genius at winning. You tried to put one under the other. What you learned is that you can't put a sprinter under a marathon runner's coach. Eventually, you have to let him run." Eisenhower stares at the map. Churchill's words hang in the air, and for the first time, Eisenhower sees it clearly. The decision he made in January, the consequences Churchill warned him about, the 6 months of tension, frustration, and wasted time. He made the safe choice, and safe isn't always best. Churchill turns to leave. Then he stops. "One more thing, Ike." Eisenhower looks at him. Churchill says, Montgomery will never forgive you for letting Patton outshine him, and Patton will never forgive you for making him wait. You managed to keep both, but you'll never satisfy either." He walks out of the tent. Eisenhower stands alone looking at the map, at two arrows pointing toward Germany, one slow, one fast, both necessary, both impossible to control. By September 1st, 1944, just 1 month after Third Army's activation, the numbers told the story. Patton's forces had advanced 400 miles across France. They had liberated over 100,000 square miles of territory. They had captured 65,000 German prisoners, and they had reached the German border ahead of every other Allied army. Montgomery's 21st Army Group, by contrast, was still consolidating around Caen and the Seine. The gap was so wide that Eisenhower quietly began shifting command authority. Montgomery retained nominal ground command on paper, but in practice, Eisenhower started giving orders directly to Bradley and Patton. By September, Montgomery's role was effectively ceremonial. The command structure Eisenhower built in January was dead. It just hadn't been officially buried yet. Churchill understood something Eisenhower learned the hard way. You can't command genius. You can only aim it. Montgomery was a genius at not losing. He planned. He prepared. He consolidated. He won battles by refusing to make mistakes. He was perfect for Normandy, where one mistake could doom the invasion. One miscalculation, and the Allies lose their foothold. The politics collapse. The alliance fractures. The war drags on for years. Montgomery wouldn't let that happen. He was too careful, too methodical, too afraid of failure. But Patton was a genius at winning. He didn't plan. He reacted. He didn't consolidate. He charged. He won battles by moving faster than the enemy could think. He was perfect for exploitation, for the breakout, for the pursuit across France. But he was a nightmare for planning, a nightmare for politics, a nightmare for Eisenhower. Eisenhower tried to harness both by putting one over the other. What he discovered was that you can't. You can't put a tiger under a zookeeper. Eventually, the tiger breaks out. Or you let it stop. Years later, after the war, Eisenhower published his memoirs. In them he wrote about the command decision. He wrote, "The decision to give Montgomery initial ground command was correct from a planning standpoint. Monty understood coalition warfare. He understood logistics. He understood the stakes. Whether it was correct from a psychological standpoint is another question. Patton never forgave me. Montgomery never understood why Patton was necessary. And Bradley spent 3 months in the middle trying to serve two masters who hated each other. In hindsight, I should have been clearer from the start. Montgomery commands until breakout, then Patton commands. Instead, I tried to manage both, and I nearly lost both." August 15th, 1944. 2 weeks into Patton's rampage across France, Montgomery sends a message to Eisenhower. He requests that Patton's fuel supplies be diverted to British forces for a concentrated northern thrust toward the Ruhr. Montgomery argues that a single strong thrust will end the war faster than multiple advances. Eisenhower receives the request. He looks at the map. Patton's Third Army is already at the German border. Montgomery's forces. Eisenhower reads the request again. Then he writes a reply. "Request denied. Operations will continue as planned." He sends it. Montgomery is furious. He protests. He argues. He threatens to resign. Eisenhower doesn't change his mind. Because by August 1944, Eisenhower has learned the lesson Churchill tried to teach him in January. You chose the right general to win the landing, but Patton is the right general to win the war. Churchill later told his secretary, "Eisenhower finally learned, you can cage a tiger for the circus, but when you need something killed, you open the cage." The story of Montgomery and Patton is not a story of right and wrong. It's a story of different kinds of genius. Montgomery's genius was patience, control, refusing to lose. Patton's genius was speed, instinct, refusing to stop. Eisenhower needed both, but he made the mistake of thinking one could command the other. What he learned, painfully over 6 months of tension and frustration, was that genius doesn't take orders. It has to be aimed. And once you aim it, you have to trust it. Eisenhower aimed Montgomery at Normandy, and Montgomery delivered a landing that didn't fail. Then Eisenhower aimed Patton at Germany, and Patton delivered a pursuit that didn't stop. The tragedy is that Eisenhower wasted 6 months trying to make them work together. 6 months of Patton sitting idle. 6 months of Montgomery expanding power he shouldn't have had. 6 months of Bradley caught in the middle. Churchill saw it coming in January. He warned Eisenhower, and in August, Standing in that tent in Normandy, Churchill delivered the lesson Eisenhower had learned the hard way. You chose the right general to win the landing, but Patton is the right general to win the war, and between the two, you've just learned the difference. That's the story of what Churchill said when Eisenhower chose Montgomery over Patton for D-Day. It's a story about leadership, about knowing when to be cautious and when to be bold, about understanding that different missions need different men, and about learning, sometimes too late, that you can't cage a tiger and expect it to stay tame. Thanks for watching WW2 Elite. If you found this story as powerful as we did, subscribe now so you don't miss our next deep dive into the leadership decisions that shaped history. Hit the like button, share this with a history lover, and let us know in the comments, who do you think Eisenhower should have chosen? We'll see you in the next one.